the faint hum of office chatter filled the sprawling, open-plan workspace, punctuated by the rhythmic tapping of keyboards and the occasional ring of a phone. At her small desk in the corner, Lena Harper adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to her laptop, her fingers flying over the keys. The glow of the screen reflected in her sharp, determined eyes as she finalized a project proposal, a comprehensive strategy that could redefine how the company approached its next big client. To anyone watching, Lena was just another employee in the marketing department, diligent, reliable, and quietly competent. But beneath her unassuming demeanor was a sharp mind and a vision far beyond the confines of her role as a junior associate. She had spent weeks crafting this proposal, poring over data, refining her ideas, and preparing for the moment she could share them. This could be her chance to finally make an impression on senior management. "Lena, the meeting's about to start," her colleague Sarah called as she passed by. Lena nodded, clutching her laptop as she made her way to the boardroom. Inside, the air was charged with anticipation. The room was filled with executives in tailored suits, each focused on their laptops or engaged in hushed conversations. At the head of the table sat Mark Ellison, the company's VP, a man known for his commanding presence and tendency to dismiss ideas he didn't consider big enough. Lena took a seat near the end of the table, feeling her pulse quicken. As the meeting began, she waited for the right moment. Finally, when the discussion reached the client she had been preparing for, Lena raised her hand. "I have a proposal I'd like to share," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves tightening in her chest. "I believe it could significantly enhance our approach." Mark glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "Lena, this isn't your area," he said dismissively. "Stick to your assignments. Stay in your lane." The room fell silent, the words hanging heavy in the air. Lena's cheeks flushed, but she straightened in her seat. "With respect, I believe my ideas are worth hearing," she said, her voice calm but firm. What happened next would change everything. The room was still as Lena held her ground, her heart pounding against her ribcage. She had spent weeks perfecting this proposal, believing in its value, and now, with her credibility on the line, she refused to back down. Mark's dismissive glare bore into her, but she kept her voice steady. "I've spent considerable time analyzing the data and understanding the client's goals," Lena said, carefully sliding a printed copy of her proposal across the table toward Mark. "I'm confident this approach aligns with their needs and our long-term strategy." Mark's jaw tightened, but he didn't immediately respond. Instead, he picked up the document, flipping through it without much interest, before tossing it onto the table. "We don't have time to entertain every junior associate's ideas," he said flatly, turning to address the rest of the room. "Let's move on." Lena felt a lump rising in her throat, but she forced it down. A quiet voice inside her whispered, "Don't let this go." She glanced around the room, noting the uncomfortable expressions of her colleagues. Most avoided her gaze, their silence confirming the unspoken rule. Challenging Mark was a risk no one wanted to take. But Lena wasn't ready to give up. She took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the edge of the table as she spoke again. "Respectfully, Mark, I think it's worth 5 minutes of this team's time to hear an idea that could bring significant results." The tension in the room thickened. Mark's eyes narrowed, his irritation clear. "And if we indulge every idea, we'll never get anything done," he snapped. "Then let's measure ideas by their merit," Lena countered. "If my proposal doesn't stand up to scrutiny, I'll withdraw it without further discussion." A murmur rippled through the room. The quiet defiance in Lena's voice wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented. For a moment, even Mark seemed taken aback, his eyes flickering with something close to intrigue before settling back into a steely glare. "Fine," he said sharply, leaning back in his chair. 5 minutes. Make it quick." Lena nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she connected her laptop to the projector. The room dimmed as her presentation filled the screen. She started with the data, concise, compelling, and expertly analyzed. Then she outlined her strategy, walking through how it addressed the client's specific pain points and aligned with their broader objectives. Her voice gained confidence as she spoke, and she noticed heads nodding around the table. A few executives leaned forward, clearly interested. By the time she finished, the room was quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence, contemplative, even impressed. One of the senior managers, Karen Michaels, broke the quiet. "That's actually quite compelling," she said, flipping through the printed proposal. "This level of detail is rare, even in senior presentations." Mark's expression darkened. "It's easy to theorize," he said dismissively. "Implementing is another matter." Karen tilted her head, undeterred. "But the theory is sound. We should discuss how it could fit into our broader strategy." Several other executives nodded in agreement, and Lena felt a flicker of hope. Still, Mark's authority loomed large, and his resistance was palpable. "It's premature to shift gears based on one untested idea," he said firmly. "We'll revisit this later." The meeting moved on, but Lena knew the seed had been planted. Karen caught her after the meeting, her expression warm. "That took guts," she said, "and you've clearly got a sharp mind. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Encouraged but cautious, Lena returned to her desk, replaying the meeting in her mind. She knew she had crossed an unspoken line with Mark, but she also knew her proposal had made an impact. Over the next few days, she doubled down, refining her ideas further and building allies within the company. Karen became a quiet supporter, offering advice on navigating office politics and encouraging Lena to keep pushing forward. But Mark wasn't one to let challenges go unnoticed. He began assigning Lena tedious, unrelated tasks, clearly hoping to derail her progress. At first, the extra work felt overwhelming, but Lena refused to let it deter her. She completed the assignments efficiently, while continuing to improve her proposal in her own time. Her persistence began to pay off. Karen arranged for Lena to present her strategy to a smaller team of decision-makers, framing it as a trial analysis rather than a direct pitch. The presentation went smoothly, and the team's response was overwhelmingly positive. They recommended escalating the proposal to higher leadership, bypassing Mark's influence entirely. When Mark found out, his reaction was swift and pointed. He called Lena into his office, his tone icy. "You're overstepping," he said. "This isn't how things work here." Lena met his gaze, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "I'm doing what I believe is best for the company. This idea isn't about me, it's about achieving better results." Mark scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "You're naive if you think good ideas are enough to get ahead. Learn your place before you make enemies you can't handle." The words stung, but Lena refused to let them shake her resolve. She walked out of his office with her head held high, determined to let her work speak louder than his threats. As the weeks went on, Lena's proposal gained traction. The leadership team approved a pilot implementation, and when the results came in, they were undeniable. Her strategy had not only exceeded expectations, but also set a new standard for client engagement. The success drew attention from senior executives, who began asking questions about the person behind the idea. Lena's name quickly spread through the company, and with it, a reputation for innovation and resilience. Mark's attempts to downplay her contributions became increasingly futile as more people recognized her value. Karen, now one of Lena's strongest advocates, helped position her for a role that would allow her to lead more initiatives. A promotion that bypassed Mark entirely. For the first time in her career, Lena felt truly seen. Not as a junior associate, but as someone whose ideas mattered. She had faced resistance, endured dismissal, and stood firm in the face of intimidation. And now she was beginning to reap the rewards of her courage. Lena's journey was far from over, but she had proven something to herself and to the company. Staying in her lane wasn't an option. She was carving her own path, and no one could take that away from her. Lena stood in the company's main conference room, this time not as a junior associate struggling to be heard, but as the lead presenter for one of the firm's largest strategic initiatives. The polished presentation she delivered highlighted the success of the pilot program born from her proposal. Executives nodded in approval as she outlined the measurable impacts: improved client engagement, increased revenue projections, and enhanced team collaboration. The same room that once silenced her now listened intently. As she concluded, the room erupted in applause. Karen, sitting near the front, gave her a knowing smile. Even some of the executives who had initially dismissed her were now among her biggest supporters. Lena felt a mix of pride and relief. She had fought for her ideas, and the results had spoken louder than any dismissal ever could. After the meeting, the company's CEO approached her. "Lena, this is exactly the kind of forward thinking we need," he said. "You've made a real impact here. Keep it up." The recognition was validating, but it wasn't just about the praise. For Lena, it was proof that standing up for her ideas, no matter how uncomfortable it had been, was worth the risk. She had challenged a system that tried to confine her, and proved that even in a hierarchical environment, determination and integrity could rise above intimidation. Mark's influence, once a looming shadow, had significantly diminished. While he remained part of the company, his credibility was quietly questioned by many, especially after his repeated dismissals of Lena's contributions came to light. Lena didn't dwell on his behavior, instead choosing to focus on her own growth and the doors her persistence had opened. As Lena walked back to her office, she paused to glance out the window, the city skyline stretching endlessly. Her journey wasn't just about one idea, it was about changing the narrative. She had shown that no one should be told to stay in their lane when they have the vision to lead. Lena smiled to herself, ready for whatever challenge came next.